So I'll start completely again. This is Paul Collinson, and I'm Dom Heffer. And most of you know us, but to those of you who don't know us, hello, welcome. And so it's a bit of a feral inside job this week. We've been doing this now for, this is our third in a series, and we intend to keep these going on for as long as we can and as long as they're popular, and they're seeming pretty popular. So we're just going to talk about, we've selected a few pieces of work each. We've got a bit of a slideshow for you, so you won't have to stare at our mugs for an hour, which I think is encouraging.
I thought that was in the contract. I was going to be on air for an hour.
Oh, sorry, your agent didn't relay that. Yeah, so we'll just crack on. And like I said, if you've got any, just got a couple more people to admit. If you've got any questions, just please hold on to them, type them through the chat function, which is just down the bottom, and then we'll answer them sort of at the end of the session. So what I'm going to try and do now, I'm going to try and share screen and get the slideshow started. So Paul, maybe we should just start with where how we met, really. Might be a,
yeah, well, I think that'd be a good place to start, because I think, yeah, it was seeing some of your early works, of which one is going to be on the screen shortly.
There it is.
Yeah, because I think you'd said that this was one of your first pieces that you kind of felt happy with after graduation, and I saw this one and others. You'd kind of done a series, and I think one of them was in the Berens Open exhibition, and there were others at an exhibition you had at the Full Truck Theatre.
That's right, yeah.
And it's one of those things when you see a piece of artwork, well, especially a painting, and it pricks your interest. And I was interested in the sort of, the technical quality, which was impressed me, but also I kind of got the idea that there was some kind of narrative in there. And they very much reminded me of another painter. I know that's a kind of awful thing to say, is that your work reminds me of it. It's kind of like, well, how about their work reminds me of your work? You know, it's that kind of damning with faint praise or whatever. But it was a painter called Stephen Campbell.
Yeah.
And they use, like you did in this sort of series, was the ideograms, these sort of codes and symbols.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, yeah, I want to make this painter, artist, that, and I tracked you down, I think, to your lair at Humber Street when you were having a show at Kingston Outlook. We're talking about this area. It must have been about 2000.
So this was
10 or 11.
Oh well, this particular piece of work that's 2007. So it's a long time ago. But I mean, if I'm talking about my work, I often start with this piece, not because I'm particularly proud of it or anything, but just because I think it was one of the first. The thing I remember most is the feeling that I had when making this piece of work. It was the first painting that I made post-graduation. So it was kind of made when I was working in my flat, and I think I'd just been made redundant from an office job actually that I had. So there was this sense of, right, okay, I can just focus now on making work. And I think one of the things about the piece is that it incorporated at least 3 factors that I thought were really important for an artist. So in the bottom right hand corner, you've got the guy with the camera. So I felt part of what I was doing was recording ideas. Then you've got the frogman in the bottom left rummaging through a bin, and I don't know if you can work it out, folks, but he's picked something out of the bin which is supposed to be a red herring. And so it's kind of like the idea that your creativity, you follow these diversions, and some of them are red herrings. And then just above him, you've got the figure in the anorak, which is kind of inspired by Columbo, really, and the sense of an investigatory sense.
Are these all these characters? Are they you? These three characters are you?
Looking back, it seems that way.
Yeah. Because again, that was one of Stephen Campbell's. He often used himself, and in other paintings, later paintings, not here, but you've certainly, there's this crossover between Woody Allen and Don Heffer.
Well, yeah, I mean, I sometimes feel like I'm Woody Allen. I'm just admitting a couple of other people, so shifting out of full screen. Anyway, so it feels like, even though, I mean, I had this feeling after making that piece of work that of the potentials of painting, which I don't think I'd felt before. And
did you graduate in painting?
I did.
Because I don't think I've seen you.
No, I wasn't doing much painting during my degree. I was making film. I did do about a year of painting, but I didn't do a hell of a lot of painting, which was strange. But it was a course that there weren't that many painters on the course. But yeah, definitely one thing I'll remember is making this painting. The feeling after it was a really positive feeling. I thought, wow, the potentials of painting, and so I rushed into making the next piece of work, but I've never felt the same again since. It's been kind of very, very strange, actually.
Yeah, people are asking if you can lean forward a bit, Paul.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, Paul, lean forward a bit.
Lean forward a bit.
Okay. Your public can't see you.
No, they can see me, they can't hear me.
Okay. So moving swiftly on, this was one of the first pieces of work that I saw of yours, and this was in the John Moores, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I mean, it was the sort of first try at the John Moores, and the first getting into the John Moore actual exhibition, which obviously was quite pleasing.
Absolutely.
But it was one of a series that I've been doing for a while. It's called England's Favourite Landscape, and that series was really looking at how I could paint paintings that meant something to me, and also hopefully was something different, because I kind of felt when I started that series of paintings at the start of this century, the early 21st century, there's sort of this, how do painters paint the English landscape? And that's what my interest was, painting landscapes, especially English landscapes, but doing it in a way that kind of interrogated or questioned or exposed, if you like, the ideologies, the underlying ideologies of our landscape and countryside, not just rural but urban as well. And it was sort of this economic, political and social arena that I think painting for a long while had kind of obscured by its very medium, by the brush mark. So there wasn't any kind of, well, maybe there was an attempt, but I couldn't see one in terms of exposing a certain reality in the landscape, in the countryside. So I was kind of casting around. I didn't want to kind of go around with a camera just clicking away at things and painting them. I didn't want to become this hunter of the picturesque, and that word, the picturesque, had historically, and still does, has a lot of value in terms of its meaning and role in landscape painting, but also importantly in the kind of heritage and tourist industries. And so I kind of started looking at that word and investigating this idea of picturesque, which turned out to be a very English notion in terms of how landscape is viewed and represented by painters. So I was kind of figuring out how I could do that, and I stumbled upon this idea of I was making models and just photographing them from different perspectives, from viewpoints. So,
yeah, we've got some images of that, haven't we? Should we?
Well, hang on. I mean, don't get ahead of yourself, mate.
Sorry.
In the contract.
Trigger finger.
Yeah, I mean, well, okay, go on. Yeah, I mean, it's this is the painting you were just looking at was called the Temple of Ancient Virtue, brackets, Pegasus Snapback, close brackets, and it was referencing or referring to an actual architectural feature in a managed landscape, which is this one that you're looking at now. This is called the Temple of Ancient Virtue, and it's at Stowe Gardens in Buckinghamshire. And this was one of the first theme parks in the country, really, from the early 1700s. And it wasn't a theme park where you got into a ride that basically scared you shitless. It was basically more of a mental or a conceptual undertaking whereby the knowledgeable tourist would walk around and visit and come across these features. This is one of many features, and it was referring back in its own ways to another nation's heritage, because this was a result of the rich people of our country going on the Grand Tour, going to the Campania in Italy and viewing the ruins of ancient Rome, the Roman Empire, and bringing their ideas, importing their ideas rather. So importing another nations and other cultures, symbols and history into our own, which is kind of quite I don't know what the word, interesting. It's sort of
yeah. It's interesting when you think about so who was that meant for? Who were the consumers of this?
Well, again, the rich tourist. It was basically they had the money, and they're also very politically loaded as well, because this one was a guy called Lord Cobham, and he was very much against the then Prime Minister Horace Walpole. And the Temple of Ancient Virtue is still here. The Temple of Modern Virtue, we actually, the owner of the estate, Lord Cobham, he actually built a ruined temple with a headless figure of the Prime Minister. So, I mean, that's pretty loaded stuff. I mean, you imagine now, you know, some rich person building an architectural feature and putting a figure of our Prime Minister without a head and saying this is, you know, basically the temple of bullshit. Then that would, you know, attract attention. So I wanted to kind of look at that and bring it forward, and how it's been kind of represented, and how painters have kind of been complicit in a way of hiding a certain reality of the rural landscape, the sort of changes of landscape use, ownership, you know, the enclosures and evictions. You know, basically you build something like this in the 1700s, you demolish a whole village, you shift your population because it spoils the view. That's what happened at Blenheim with a village called Woodstock. It happened in North Yorkshire at Castle Howard, where the guy who was a sort of contemporary of Cobham's, the Howard family, they basically demolished an old village called Helderskell, yeah, just so they could get a nice view and build something else. So I wanted to do that, but again, I didn't want to go around with my camera sort of clicking away and bringing it back to the studio. So what I did was build my own. So this is my Temple of Ancient Virtue, and it's bit more clunky and a bit more low tech than.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was one of the things that first intrigued me about your work, is when I found out that you actually made models and then took photographs of the models. And as we'll see later on, you know, there's a difference, I think, that's quite visible in the work between when you stop using that particular process. But when you're making the models, we've discussed this quite a few times, but when you think about taking the photographs, there's quite a selection process.
Because when I started the series called England's Favourite Landscape, I was still using film, a camera with film in. So what I was doing was kind of clicking away, thinking, oh, that might be okay. Yeah. I was taking them to a commercial, you know, high street processor, and you'd get your little thing of photographs back, and you'd be kind of, you didn't really know what you were going to get. So that was a kind of interesting sort of process where the editing was taken out of my control. So obviously with the advent of digital cameras, I was able to preview what I was going to get. And what I would do is say, well, photograph this one, I'm sorry, I'm pointing at the viewer, and I'm pointing at the image of the that you're looking at. This this kind
everyone Paul's pointing.
Oh, Chris is used to that. The sort of made up thing, the snap bar. I mean, that was well, the idea for this was quite old, actually. It's one of these things where things hang around for quite a while. It was in a little sketchbook, and I came back to it, and I kind of made the Pegasus figure using a little toy horse, and I've got a plaster figure of a bird or something. I think it was a blue tit, and I broke the wings off it. It was quite, you know, and glued it onto the horse.
I can imagine you doing that.
Yeah, yeah. So the snap bar was basically the ubiquitous roadside snap bar. So it's kind of democratizing the idea of a temple. So you know, it's sort of making the everyday, bringing that into my paintings, and the sort of bits of classical ruin. They were cake decorations. These are things that are called details. So then I basically took it outside of the studio and put it on a wheelie bin, and I was taking photographs around this wheelie bin in my back garden, obviously on a sunny day, and I got this amazing kind of Mediterranean type view. Yeah. But I was still outputting it onto a photograph. Yeah. So I was always working from a photograph. The painting is 120 by 180 centimetres, so sort of 4 by 6 foot in old money. So I was having to get from a 6 by 4 inch to a 6 by foot. I was using one of these, which is a cartographer's eyepiece, and this is basically what map makers look at to see what they're actually drawing, and also other people can look at and see what we're going. So I was doing this in the studio, and I kind of realised at some point this is going to bugger my eyes up. So I had to find another way. But anyway, this is for a few slides on. So I kind of solved what to paint, and by making these models, and the how to paint was basically using the photographs, so that this idea of the brush mark, this pleasing brush mark that was obscuring the reality, this this sort of a distress, and John Ruskin refers to this in his first volume of Modern Painters. He calls it the heartless picturesque, whereby you know, painters were hiding the distress, or they were using the picturesque to paint distress, but hiding the reality of it. And I think this kind of takes us right back to the start of the Enlightenment as well. I mean, I don't want to go down Immanuel Kant route, but it's the idea of the disinterested viewer, whereby taste kind of informs, or dictates your pleasure, what you're looking at.
I think one of the things that I remember, I don't know whether it was this paint in particular that was referred to, didn't you refer to it somewhere as Ruin and Chips?
Yeah, that was, it was a piece by, I think she's actually here tonight, Maggie, who's a teacher at the UC University Marie Curie in Lublin, and she'd written an article after seeing this painting at the John Moore, and yeah, I think it was basically a good summation of our love affair with ruins and nostalgia, ruin and chips. So I think that was
chips with everything.
Ruins with everything as well, and classical ruins at that as well.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I remember being fascinated when I first saw your work about how everything, and then actually having a conversation with you about how things seem so consciously put together. And I think beyond the fact that obviously I was attracted to them visually, I was amazed at how they seem like, and you've described them as like constellations of ideas, how everything's placed very, very carefully. The idea of really consciously putting together an image was difficult for me to comprehend. You know, I really respected that approach to painting. So, and then obviously, because I've had the insight where we've had lots and lots of conversations about specific areas and specific bits of the painting. So I know, for example, that the graffiti on the Pegasus snack bar, the same-o is a reference to Basquiat, isn't it? Same old, some of his early graffiti. Yeah, so I just always thought we had very different approaches to painting, but also some similarities.
I think, yeah, well, I think the conceptual, this sort of narrative thing, I think that's a similarity, because I think that, again, that's going back to your painting that we saw first. I mean, you know, that must have been a tremendous undertaking. I mean, was that planned ahead, or was it created?
I mean, no, not really. I mean, I've never really, in fact, maybe we should, we won't go back to the old one, but I can still talk about, I mean, there's a similarity in the process of making this particular piece. So I've never really sketched out or made really careful plans of the work initially. It all starts on a canvas, and so this piece of work is called Channel 4, and it was inspired by the early sort of 1980s Channel 4 ident. They call them an ident, that's the bit in between the programs where you get a bit of advertising regarding the channel. So I don't know if anyone remembers the coloured blocks coming together to form the 4. I was thinking about that, but they didn't go in first. I mean, this painting started in a completely different fashion to how it ended up. So the figures where you can see the kind of in the bottom, sort of just left of centre, the two prominent figures, they were fully painted in to begin with, and the idea of the analog interference was almost like a way of articulating the sort of cognitive dissonance, this sense of having a clear idea and then that getting interfered with as the process of painting begins. So if you can imagine, you can see just to the left near the front, you've got the kind of the figure that's got the interference kind of up to his head. So it's almost like the interference is spreading in a viral fashion slowly up his body, and that happened around the whole painting. So initially the entire painting had a background. There was, if I remember correctly, there was a kind of archway in the background, and the figures were full figures, and the interference kind of took over. But I guess at the time I was thinking a lot about some work by media theorists as well, the likes of Marshall McLuhan, who's famous for saying the medium is the message. If you can see the coffin to the right-hand side of the canvas, there's an inscription on the coffin, and that says the medium is the message. So yeah, so the blocks kind of came in, and also there's a play on words there with the idea of creative block. I like to call these blocks creative blocks, because often if you hit that kind of sense of a blockage where you can't circumnavigate this sense of this stifling sense of what do I do next with the piece of work, I found it quite useful just to paint a block.
Yeah.
So it was literally painter's block.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, once I started painting those, I got to a point where I thought, well, how far can I push it before I've used too many?
Yeah.
And I remember saying to you, I'd leave the studio and think, oh, I'll just put one more in, and then I'd come back the next day and put another one in, and then just, I think the final one was the tiny little one in the bottom right, which is red and blue. And then for some reason, after adding that final block, it was like, yeah. That's enough blocks.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I've noticed. I mean, visiting your studio, you know, kind of coming to something that's sort of on the go, and you know, come back the next time, it's kind of changed quite a bit. So
yeah. In a way, that's see again. That's what fascinated me about your process, is that sense of, you know, whilst they do still change, they don't change a massive amount, do they? No. But I kind of, in the way I work, I'm a little bit distrustful of ones that don't change. And so if a piece of work doesn't go through these twists and turns and deviations, I'm a little bit mistrustful of it. Yeah.
I think that's where this changing goes on in the three-dimensional world with the model making.
Yeah.
So in the end, I can, as you said, it's sort of like a constellation that comes with a constellation of ideas. So that way of playing, in a way, because that's how it happened, you know. When I was, I think it was like 2 studio spaces ago from where I am now, you know, it was playing around, and I think that thing of being able to, for me anyway, have an idea of what I'm going to paint is quite important.
Yeah.
Sort of because of the way I paint now. And,
yeah.
You know, it's not the kind of splashing it all over and I'll shift that over there and all of that. I mean, it's I've got things fairly well pinned down.
Yeah.
Once I start painting, so all the kind of sketching goes on. Well, it used to go on in 3 dimensions. Now it's kind of in the virtual world. Well, all of it is at the moment is in the virtual world.
Should we move on?
Yeah.
So this.
So yeah, I mean that kind of leads us to this one, which was kind of like a transition piece, because that England's Favourite Landscape, I'd had basically a retrospective exhibition. Thankfully, it wasn't a posthumous one, quite a big gallery space, and you know, somebody said, well, where do you go to next? You know, you need to change, and that was quite a big thing when you've been sort of doing stuff for a number of years, and then, you know, kind of, yeah, where do you go next? So this was, I've included this one. It's called Heidegger's Hut, because it's sort of like a transition piece. It was one of the pieces that involved model making and digital creation. So it was that point when somebody said, oh, you know, what are you going to do next? Well, again, it was that thing of wanting to paint something that had, for me anyway, a way of expressing my anger, ranting at the world, and all that kind of thing. And at that point in time, sort of 2013 into 2014, I'd noticed that there was a rising of nationalism and tribalism in Europe. And it was almost kind of a middle-age mentality. And it sort of came from, I think, the destabilization in the Middle East and the sort of influx of people from that region to get away from the war, which I'll talk more about later. But basically, I was seeing kind of groups like Heidegger, which was a kind of a pan-European right-wing group that their supporters tended to dress up like in medieval armour and sort of the cross of St. George and all that crap. And it was just kind of, you know, we've got this obsession with going back in time. And I read Umberto Eco's his essay called Dreaming of the Middle Ages, and that was in his book from the 1980s called Travels in Hyperreality. For somebody writing the mid-1980s, it was so prescient, you know, that it was more of a culture, he was writing more about our cultural obsession, and sort of that, yeah, you know, there was this, you know, whole kind of plethora of films about medievalism, like, you know, Braveheart, Kingdom of Heaven, and even Star Wars has this kind of medieval Middle Ages narrative, but brought to the into the future by science fiction. And so I was kind of intrigued by this idea that you know, there's sort of this medieval thing going on, and especially in relation to how right-wing groups were kind of taking hold of that and saying, well, we need to go back to the old civilizations. And I was playing around on Google, and I just put in Nazism, medievalism, and there was a thing for a publication called Heidegger's Hut by an architectural historian called Adam Shah. And that kind of intrigued me. And I'd kind of heard, you know, I read a bit of Heidegger. I couldn't make sense of it. I was it was just something that I was aware of. And then it was like, well, that really got me interested in reading about this guy called Martin Heidegger, who, you know, and how important he was for 20th century philosophy. And how he sort of was the kind of last gasp of that kind of Enlightenment philosophy that started with Immanuel Kant, and you know, basically how we understand the world. The world isn't out there, that something happens. We're part of the world, and how we view it is important. And what Heidegger was writing about, a thing called phenomenology, and how he kind of changed that idea of looking at the world. But importantly for me was this book on his hut, and that this guy who was a you know, well-known, well-respected philosopher from Germany in the 1920s and 30s. Basically, he built this hut in the foothills of the Black Forest, and that's where he'd go and retreat. But also, what fascinated me was his writings that reflected a zeitgeist of the time of 1930s Germany, the rise of fascism and Adolf Hitler, especially in the his lectures. He's using words about rootedness and about the blood and soil of a nation, of nationhood. And that's still going on now. Well, you know, you talk about blood and soil, and the blood of the nation, and the soil of the nation, how we're rooted, and, you know, Heidegger going on about the nomadic races, you know, basically referring to the Semite, you know, race being anti-Semitic. Yeah. And I thought, well, there's a real problem there. So how do I use that? And my idea for this hut was to incorporate some of those ideas, and especially this military fighting vehicle, which is from World War II, which is a German tank. And it's kind of like, well, where do I set it? I mean, it's, to make it a hut, it's sort of Heidegger's cell, where he's hiding away. But what I kind of did, this is a frontispiece from a book from the 1700s, and it's sort of a book on the origins of architecture. And this is an allegory of the origins of architecture, and it's a sort of the temple in Sacred Grove. So I made my own. So this is where Heidegger, his cell was in his hut. So it was starting to take shape. And
but where you're talking about that being a sort of transitory piece, there's also the reference to the I don't know whether people have recognised the Grand Theft Auto reference as well.
Well, yeah, it's that was his comments on technology, which came after the war, but even before the war, he was describing, I think in one of his lectures, Introduction to Metaphysics, he was commenting on National Socialism. He said what the great thing about National Socialism is, i.e. the Nazis, the German fascists, was it's sort of how it dealt with global technology and modern man. So what often happens when I'm doing this is that you kind of do a bit more reading and research, and you stumble upon things. It's almost like things, they're already out there. You're not inventing things. So this pastoral setting was, again, a kind of a setting for Heidegger's hut, his kind of retreat into the peasant. Because I mean, the Nazis made a big thing about the peasants being peasant warriors, going back to sort of medieval times. And I'll shortcut this, because I think if you want to read more about that or find out more about that, go to my website, dreamingofthemiddleages.com, because this is, as I say, one of the earlier paintings of this series, because I think that's one of the things that started this series off, this Dreaming of the Middle Ages. Basically, we had that, and this is where the kind of analog stuff and the digital stuff, the virtual stuff, kind of comes together, because you can see here where I've kind of used a blue screen, so it makes it easy to actually cut it out on a software package. I can photograph that, I can cut out the image I need, and then obviously then that I can drop that into a virtual backdrop. So there's various different elements. So again, the Grand Theft Auto, I wanted that kind of modern technology that Heidegger seemed to acknowledge but seemed to be afraid of. He was sort of more an old romantic at heart, I think. And again, I think this thing of trying to understand his writings, I found him very opaque, and I think he intended that as well. But it's one of his last interviews for Der Spiegel in the 60s. He was called Only God Can Save Us. He was sort of writing about Americanization, and that was his biggest fear. You know, it wasn't the communists, the Russians, it was the Americans. And again, the bits of stone in the foreground, they were a reference to one of his essays called Building, Dwelling, Thinking, that he wrote after the war. I mean, basically, he got away with his life at the Nuremberg trials. I think he, obviously he's a good talker. He talked his way out of, the outcome of a lot of the other kind of criminals of the Third Reich, and he got lucky, I think. And basically, he wrote this essay, Building, Dwelling, Thinking, in the midst of rubble. I mean, German nation was a pile of rubble. Every city had what was called the Rubble Mountain, and he got away with it. But again, coming back to the painting itself and its rendering, I mean, that was a solution that I'd kind of, maybe it's a default setting now, in that it's getting away from those brush marks again. It's,
yeah, I mean, I've always, there's a tendency for the skies to be crystal clear around this period of your work as well, isn't there?
yeah.
And that's always intrigued me when I think about, it makes me think of some Renaissance painters and a lot of romantic artists as well, and Caspar David Friedrich and Canaletto as well. It makes me think of, but I think there's something about the blue skies that create a kind of starkness and a stillness about some of the scenes, which kind of sets the scene for this precise placement of things.
Yeah. I mean, it presents its own challenges because that kind of backdrop is rolled on, so it's a very kind of pristine surface. So if you make a mistake, you're kind of really in trouble because you've got to kind of then re-establish that continuity. And I mean, again, creating it in a digital software package meant it got rid of the use of the eyeglass, because all you do is Control plus, your image, you can increase it, but that brought other challenges in making sure that everything was had as high definition as possible. So again, this was a sort of transition piece that I don't know. I mean, I'm ambivalent about this one now. As maybe it's something that you do when you move on. I know you work in series as well. So it's just because I've taken that one off my website now. So,
oh right, okay.
Yeah. But again, there's the essay available, Heidegger. So if anybody's interested, they can go and look at the website, and there's a link to the site where you can read it. Okay,
so we've got. We might have to speed up a bit for these last two images. So this is my final image. This is bringing us right up to date now. So this is 2020. Made this piece of work as part of a project called Rethinking Civil Society, and started making it in December last year and sort of finished it in early January this year. And I mean, one of the first things I did making this piece of work was paint the word meta
I remember,
on the canvas, just as a way to kickstart the ideas. And you can't see that at all now, but I was thinking about the origins of the word meta and it meaning kind of underneath and coming before and metaphysics. And it was just a way of getting into the painting, really. I knew I did actually have a kind of brief that, just rethinking civil society, just how could I contribute to that project. And I had come across German philosophers are coming off well tonight, aren't they? I'd come across Arthur Schopenhauer's work and this idea of
idealism, isn't it? None of this English empiricism crap.
Yeah. We like the idealists. Maybe we are idealists. I guess artists maybe are.
Well, if you can't, the English, if you can't see it, it won't exist, lad. So I was thinking about this idea called the Hedgehog's Dilemma, which is a sort of metaphor that Schopenhauer uses, and he's sort of mid-19th century, and it's a metaphor he uses for the problem of human closeness and proximity. And he just tells a story of this group of hedgehogs that gather together for warmth and for security. And obviously they have the problem that they can't get too close because otherwise they start to spike each other with their spines. And so it's a metaphor about what is the right proximity. Is there such a thing?
And when I was reading about that, it just provoked this image in my mind of this kind of cascade of hedgehogs. It's also called the Porcupines Dilemma. But these hedgehogs or porcupines, I've used a bit of artistic license there. They could be either or. I just have this image of them parading like lemmings almost, going down this zigzag slide. So that was the next thing to go in after the idea of the meta. And as I was working on it, then the actual spikes of the sprayed areas came in, and this was one of the first pieces of work where I started to use spray paint quite a lot. And one of the delightful things about that process is that obviously you have to mask off lots of the canvas. And so they go into this kind of phase, which I like to call like a cocoon phase, where almost the entire canvas is covered with masking tape. Yeah. And then you go back into the studio the next day and it's like you've got a Christmas present. You have to unwrap it. And then
but you don't tear it off there because masking tape, you pull the paint.
You pull it off carefully, but it's a very satisfying process. Just like pulling off a plaster, really. But it's just it sort of include. You sometimes completely forget what was underneath. Yeah. And so it's another way of kind of having almost a first impression of the work. And sometimes you're pleased with it, sometimes you're disappointed with it. But so this went into its cocoon phase and then sort of came out of it, and then the figure with the, as you say, ready brick glow, and that is a reference to that early ready brick advert, and it's also a reference to Benjamin's idea of an aura around a work of art. But the figure is loosely based on good old Bob Ross, who we all know and love. And I was thinking about the idea of, so if you've got this problem of proximity, this thinking about society, where does the artist fit in? So he's kind of hovering there with his palette and his trusty palette knife, trying to find a way in through this grid of spikes and against these hedgehogs.
But he's been sort of struck out by lightning.
Yeah, and
zigzag.
Then
Is that a formal thing? Or?
It was the very last thing to go in. It felt as if he was hovering too much in the foreground. I'm interested in the relationship, these figure-ground relationships, and how this additional spray paint technique allows me to play with that idea of what's in front of what. But Bob was too prominent. He was too far forward. If you can imagine that without the zigzag, it just felt like the painting wasn't finished. So I had to knock him back.
Yeah,
with a happy little zigzag.
Because I mean, I've used Bob in another painting.
Yeah, Bob turns up quite a lot as a motif, generally for the kind of stereotypical, or just, you know, the artist generally, really, an artist.
Right. So you've stopped using yourself.
For a better painting. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Certainly a more popular one, but also just thinking about Bob. This was, and thinking about this piece of work generally. So this was obviously pre-COVID. So it seemed like the work had a new resonance when we got to sort of March this year. That idea of proximity became more resonant.
Improving civic society. No, that's I mean that how artists are going to represent the current situation is kind of interesting. So move on to the last one and get a quick one in. Yeah, I mean, this was almost like a painting in search of a title. Because I mean, this is in a way my lockdown paint, or one of my lockdown paintings, or the big lockdown painting. Again, it's from the series Dreaming of the Middle Ages, but it's the Syrian paintings. I've done some paintings on the subject to Syria, and that kind of what we were talking about earlier about the Arab Spring from 2010, 2011, and then the how it didn't happen in Syria. I mean, this canvas, this painting is 120 by 120 centimeters, and again, it was a painting in search of a title, but it was almost like this time the painting came before, almost like the idea behind it came. I was sort of wanting certain bits in, like the tank again, which is a Russian, well, a Soviet tank, because the Syrian army was and still is supplied by Soviet and now Russian built military hardware. Looking at images of Syria coming over on the media, the sort of war, it was basically being bombed back into the Middle Ages, the ruins. But having said that, parts of Damascus, the rich elite of Syrian society, they still want to have their fun. And it's a very secular society. I mean, you think about Bashar al-Assad. I mean, basically, he was trained in the UK as an eye surgeon. He married a British, he's got a British wife, and he likes all the trappings of Western society. So that's where the idea for the pool came in, and the building in the background and the blue sky again. And that came from a film called The Florida Project, with Willem Dafoe, and it's about a single mother who's kind of existing, living in a motel that's next to Disney World in Florida. This motel's the Magic Castle Hotel. So that was this kind of element of hyper-reality as well that I wanted to bring in, and the palm trees, the kind of luxurious idea of luxury, and dealing with the idea of, again, the idea of refugees, where it's become a mass phenomenon. We kind of think of refugees as this blob now that the world has to deal with. It's sort of the shifting mass. I mean, people moving as old as humanity. So I didn't really want to kind of use a kind of exploitative tool of actually depicting a refugee, a person. And it was thinking, how do I get this idea of life? I used a monkey in a previous painting, and that one was the angel of history. This one was sort of like the angel of the present day. So I was thinking, well, I suppose a monkey is our nearest kind of animal relation would make a good stand-in, and I wanted the eyes to have a very knowing quality as well. So it's looking at the viewer. The kind of rich people in the pool, they're preoccupied with their own ways and their own kind of pastimes, whatever. They've got their own interests.
I think sort of one of the things that struck me about this piece of work when I first saw it was because I remember you'd seen that show. I can't remember the name of the artist, but it was at Newport Street Gallery.
Oh, Martin Eder.
Martin Eder, yeah. And the way that he used and juxtaposed images and his compositions throughout digital manipulation.
Yeah.
And how he didn't try and disguise that at all was quite. You were interested in that, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that again, this thing of working in a digital space, because I mean this is purely this one is purely created in a digital space. It's all been dragged off the internet.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's almost like a triptych. And I didn't want to hide the divisions. It can be a plausible space, because again, that's one of the things that I've always tried to do is present a plausible space. But as you say, that Martin Eder show and other artists I've looked at since that use that idea of montage, and I think that's quite a useful way of working, except disrupts the idea of these sort of picture playing and things like that. But then, as I said, I found a title at last for this painting called Homo Sacer, and that was basically a book, a small text by an Italian writer this time, Giorgio Agamben, and it's called Homo Sacer, Sovereign Power and Bare Life. And that's basically, again, it's a strange thing where it's almost like the painting comes and then the idea is there, but then it might be that basically what we're doing is already out there. We can't, you know, whatever we're doing, we're not going to invent something new. It's just basically that this happened to coincide with that text that I stumbled upon again, just reading it. And yeah, it's basically about how the bare life can be excluded from, it's outlawed, it's excluded from the law. And I've felt that that was what was happening in Syria, in the part of the population was basically being pushed outside the law. And Homo Sacer is literally translates as sacred human, somebody who can be killed but not sacrificed, and whoever kills the sacred human is not subject to punishment or anything like that, because they are literally outlaws. And I think this is an issue where the state, the tyrant, the government can basically take decisions that don't reference any law. And I just think it's very relevant. So again, it's just my way of commenting on the world.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could, I'm sure you all have guessed we could probably go on for another couple of hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't get out much, do we?
No, I wanted somebody to talk to tonight.
Yeah, yeah. But it's that time of the proceedings when we go over to Jane Jones on the phones and see if any of you have got any questions that we can try to answer or anything we can elaborate on. So Jane Jones on the phones, have you got anything for us?
Quite a few things, yeah. So Josie, going back to that painting Dom of yours with the interference, I think it was the first one, and she's asking that, is it important to you that the painting was fully painted underneath before the interference was on that level?
Yeah, it was, yeah. If we, maybe just flip back to it. There's a number of works that I've treated in a similar way where the underpainting has happened. It kind of feels like without that happening, then the interference would have been a bit irrelevant. The whole point was that the interference flooded into the landscape, the imaginary landscape. So yeah, and infected like a virus, infected the painting with this sense of digital space. Yeah.
Yeah. And Esther goes on to ask, sort of following off that, to both of you really, that in both of your processes, there's a slowing down of the process. Like with you, Paul, you make the diorama, you take the photographs, and then, or you digitally compose, and then with Dom, there's these layers. And is that part of the concept for you both, that in a world where communication is really speeded up, is that something that's really important to you both?
I think that just painting in general can be is a slow process. I mean, you know, you've got the super slow ways, super slow cooking, but I think for me anyway, it was. I mean, when I was doing my degree and sort of immediately after that, I mean, maybe this is another subject of a fry-up is, you know, where do we come from? And I was very much abstract expressionist, and it was very much, you know, slapping the paint on and moving it about physically. and there's a lot of energy in that, and big brushes as well. So yeah, this certainly for me, it's slowed things down, and certainly that last painting, kind of lockdown painting, there didn't feel any urgency to get it finished, A, because I didn't have any exhibitions lined up, B, I wasn't going anywhere physically in terms of, you know, leaving the studio. So yeah, it's it had, and maybe that's can be seen in that painting. I don't know, somebody said that, well, that looks a very different painting to others, so maybe that's slowing things down.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was recently that great show called Slow Painting, which focused on that very idea of things that took a long time, the fact that painting has its own kind of time zone, really. I'm always really conscious of ideas going quickly, but painting being relatively slow. I mean, it's not something that I deliberately choose to do, but again, if they're too quick, I tend to have a mistrust of them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are. I mean, I'm aware that sometimes I can be trying to take shortcuts in the editing process before I actually start painting, where, like you said, the big areas of blue, you think, well, that can be blocked in really quickly.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, well, yeah, but you kind of then maybe preparing for a fall later on, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can trip you up later on, as I say, if you make an error or something, then
yeah.
But again, that's just a technical process rather than an intentional conceptual thing, really.
Anything else, Jane Jones, on the phones?
There's a few, but Josie asked a follow-on question about the viewer wouldn't necessarily know that happens in your process, Dom.
Yeah.
And does that matter to you? Like, does it matter to you that process is important to you, regardless of whether the viewer would know?
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons that I do quite a lot of film work and often film the processes of the paintings, is to try and articulate that a bit more. So I guess it's a bit of a cop-out, but my main answer to that is that the film stuff helps to articulate painting in movement and ideas in movement, whereas it's not essential to me that, I mean, there are areas when, if you get up, you can't really see it in that reproduction, but there are areas where you can see a bit of the underpainting. It's not something that I completely block out, or I'm too bothered about completely blocking out. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Josie has a question for you, Paul. She says there's obviously very strong symbolism in your work, and she wonders how much you want this to be communicated to the viewer, or would you prefer the work to be viewed? Would you prefer the work to be viewed with that contextual information, or are you like happy for the viewer to bring their own interpretation?
I think with any painting, the viewer will bring their own ideas with them, and so in a way, it's got to work as a painting first, and I think that's the challenge of incorporating those pieces within the work, that I know what they're about, but they've got to make sense pictorially and in the painting as well. So I think, yeah, I'm not concerned about whether people get it straight away or if at all, really. So I think, yeah, the quick answer is no. Basically, works as a painting, and I think how people view a painting is you can't control that. You can't legislate for that. That's what happens when you put paintings out into the world, you know. And that's one of the challenges, really.
Yeah, and Esther says, with no offence to you, Paul, that they're almost more accessible to her without the contextual information, just bringing her own response to the painting.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, I think, as Dom said, you know, we could probably talk for another hour about our respective paintings, and I think, you know, because of the length of time we work on them, you know, that's it. And I think it's certainly for me, it's that romantic notion of the artist sort of struggling. I think, Tony Hancock, sort of
the rebel.
Every brush mark is torn out of me, And it's like, well, no, not really, not for me. I mean, it's just getting it right, I suppose, making it work, and that's it. I mean, I'm not painting a pink octagon or a black triangle or anything like that. It's just,
that's one of the things that strikes me when I look at them, because I hear, that the immense thought that's gone into them, and they're often very kind of dark. They come from quite sort of dark ideas, if you like, or difficult ideas.
Difficult, probably.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but then maybe that's just for my own kind of mental exercise. I don't work out at the gym. I just kind of read stuff and try and figure it out. But then, if I can't, it's like, well.
Yeah, but when I look at the paintings, my experience of them is quite joyful, and I don't know if it's the light and the associations of that, but they
Don't look at his paintings.
No, that's
another Collinson. Oh God!
But like I was saying about the clear blue sky, sometimes it feels like there's this notion of shedding light. You're shedding light upon these.
Well, I think it's this idea of going back to the medieval idea of heaven and utopia, and that the medieval idea of the world out there. The pre-Copernican world. It was all heavenly, whatever happened was not our fault. It's, the work of some, being out there. It's nothing to do with us, as long as we say our prayers, we'll be okay, So.
And then that sense in like the post-Copernican world, that sense of the heavenly firmament was no longer seen as like a protective layer. It was kind of like, oh my God, we're on this spinning rock, tumbling in the middle of nothingness. What are we going to do?
But then, the world came into us. We were looking. It was like, what do you mean? I got to make sense of the world. It's like the world's out there. No, it's you, mate. You're the subject. That's the object. What do you mean? Well, you've got taste. What do you mean I got taste? Well, you're judging things, aren't you?
So, Liz, these asked if either of you've got any exhibitions in the pipeline. She says no pun intended, no.
In the pipeline, well, I think for me personally, not in the immediate future. Although I'm going to be doing another Zoom thing this weekend, which is a conference which is based in America. So I'm kind of focusing on that at the moment, with the joys of Zoom.
Me, no, and I'm not really bothered. And this was sort of pre-March this year as well. I'd kind of I wanted a rest really, because I've kind of spent a lot of time driving vans up and down motorways delivering artwork, and I just thought, I really would like just to have the I intended to do that a few years ago, but for some reason it didn't happen. Exhibitions came up and you feel obliged to do them. So, as I say, it's nice to get out and communicate with people and just discuss things and whatever, but in terms of exhibitions, no, nothing lined up.
So, I think that might be a good point at which to draw proceedings to a close. But before we go, I'd just like to thank everyone for turning up. It's been very enjoyable. It's been great to learn more about your processes and your work. I mean,
well, I think we know a lot about each other's work because we've sort of known each other a long time, and I think that's kind of a valuable thing nowadays, is when you can have that relationship with not a painter, but also kind of person as well. As I say, we were looking at being the new Alas Smith and Jones, or Bob Mortimer and Paul Whitehouse go fishing. I think I'd
rather that than Derek and Clive. So yeah, I think that's
On
been
that note.
on that note. Yeah, so thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you.
We shall be having another feral fry up next month. That's going to be with Eleanor Scott of Nor Clothing, a textile artist. So we'll be talking to her about her processes. And so if you enjoyed this evening, then if you aren't already on the Feral Art School mailing list, just pop a little email to info@feralartschool.org and that'll put you on the mailing list.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you to Jane Jones on the phones for doing sterling work again. Thank you. And I hope to see you all again soon. Thanks very much. I'm going to log out now. I'm going to kick you all out. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.